good day. It's morning for me, but it might not be for you. And welcome to the deep dive today. And today we're going to be doing something that I talked about last week, and it sounded like folks were really interested in. So we're doing it. And that is a code review of code that I've written. Sorry, I'm just realizing I'm not in fact centered. There we go. That's better. A code review of code that I wrote 8 years ago. God, time continues to move forward, apparently, regardless of what else happens. So, code review of code that I wrote 8 years ago that is probably the worst code I've ever written. And yeah, we're going to go through it, and I'm going to talk about, what the things were that I should not have done, but also what the things are that I think were a good thing to have done, and that really, I approve of. Ooh, 1 second, let me make sure it's a live chat. And because we did have problems with spam last week, I'm very busy. There's a lot going on in my life right now, but we are now subscribers only for the chat. So once you subscribe, 5 minutes later, you'll be able to chat. Sorry about that. I can't deal with the spam. It is too much. So let's start with background. Why did I build this? So if you are a linguist or have worked a bit with speech data, you may know some of these things. So here we have PROT. PROT is a program for acoustic analysis of speech and taking measures from speech. So basically it does, creates a spectrogram, which is an image of a speech signal with frequency on the up one is the y-axis. I'm pretty sure. Sometimes I get things backwards, the hashtag dyslexia. And then time on the x-axis, and then intensity of signal is represented as, color or darkness tint. And then it allows you to do things like extract specific acoustic characteristics from the speech signal. And I've mentioned before, some of y'all may know this, but my PhD is in linguistics. My undergraduate degree was in linguistics and English literature. So a lot of the work that I did in grad school was around speech from a language side. And then I got more and more into technology, and then started working in automatic speech recognition, but still with a very speech science phonetics, informed viewpoint. So that is what I was doing here. And I was using this program, PROT, to do some of the signal analysis, right? So the Fourier transforms, and, I don't think I was doing any filtering with this particular speech signal, but yes. And then this is sort of information about what I was doing. Useful functions in PROT. Note that you may need to update PROT if you get error text below like this. So that's nice. If you got the error, you'd get a little bit of information about what to do, which is update PROT in this example. And then who wrote it and why. And then of course at the time I was a National Science Foundation graduate research fellow. So saying where I got my funding from as well. So this is on my GitHub as well, and I'll actually paste the link if you'd like to take a look as well. Don't use it. Do not use this code without major refactoring, and we'll talk about why. You can see a little bit more information in the README. So I think one thing that is good is that it has a README. 10 out of 10, love to see a README. So I think that is great to see. And then also I saw lots of comments, which I also like. I like well-commented code. Maybe too many comments, actually. As we get into it, you'll see what that looks like. And here's a little bit more description about what's going on in here. So we just looked at I'm zoomed in a little bit far. So we just were looking at the useful prop functions.r. So this is in R, the statistical programming language. And then we also have the prop R analysis, which is the script that uses these functions. So another thing that I think is really good is modular code wrote and separated functions. And I'm just using pastebin here as a little, I'm just using pastebin here as a way that I can keep and share notes because I'm not signed into anything. Yeah, so I think that's good. Definitely some, some good things about this. I did not, in fact, continue to actively update it, as I think if we check out, oh, somebody branched it. Oh no. Oh, it was me. Okay. Yeah. Did not exactly get a lot of updates like I promised I would, which I think is normal for a lot of people's code that they're doing for specific projects. I have a to-do list, which I like. So, if someone wanted to, fork and add to this, I think this is a clear thing of what to do. I might probably have put that into issues instead. So I think that's a thing that could improve. And that way it would just be easier for someone to be like, oh yeah, I'm working on this. And then, it would just be better for collaboration or my own work in the future. Not that I'm going to go back to this. Again, the last time that, this was touched was, I think, in 2014. So let me double check. Yeah, 8 years ago. So I would call this abandonware. It is not getting any love for a good reason. Yeah, so I will tell you a little bit of background on why I wrote this code that I don't mention in here. And that is, I was, before I wrote this to automate it, doing this by hand. So Prot is a program that has a built-in scripting language, Prot scripting language, which I was using for some automation, but it wasn't really enough I had very specific requirements for how the measurements from the acoustic information were output for my statistical analysis, and Prot scripting language, I probably could have figured it out, but it would have taken me a really long time. And I was already using R for the statistical analysis, so I thought, might as well use R also for the plugin. And I'm building on Prot R. Their security certificate is expired. Which is a code somebody else wrote, and by somebody else I mean Aaron Albin. So thanks to Aaron Albin. That is another thing that was good. Included links to dependencies for documentation for dependencies. Really good that I included those links. Are you gonna, there we go. Sorry, I'm going through and using spell check. I don't think you can see the little pop-ups. So I think that was good, right? That helped me, 8 years later. Whoop, oh no, go back. It helped me 8 years later go and find out what it did. And this was also came out in 2014. So this was a very new package when I was writing the code. And it says it's under active development. Let's check theirs. Yep. So I don't know if it is any longer under active development, but oh, Joseph also worked on that. That's nice. Sorry, Joseph Fuwald, who I'm not entirely sure who's watching right now, but some of you may know. I know we have a lot of mutual acquaintances. So yes, so I was writing this R script around this Prot scripting tool in order to avoid doing something manually. And I had a lot of speech data that I was taking measurements from. Hundreds, if not thousands of tokens. And if I had done it by hand, it would probably have taken me a week, maybe a couple weeks worth of work, because I also had multiple measurements that I was taking. And this is the code I wrote so that I didn't have to do that work by hand and I could have a computer do it. It did that, right? It saved me time. It did save me a couple weeks worth of manual labor. What it did not do was be very efficient, either from a memory standpoint or a runtime standpoint. So with that, let's jump a little bit more into these functions, and then we're going to go in and look in the analysis, and I'll talk about just where I went wrong. And it's okay if you're not super familiar with R. I'll talk about that as well. Okay, so I've got a number of functions here. I have number of intervals, labels of intervals. So if you are using RStudio, which is what I was using, this, double hashtag, I guess, header, level 2 header in Markdown, it creates sections in the code that you can jump to. So I think that was good. It made it much easier to navigate when I was working in RStudio. And if somebody downloaded this and wanted to work with it in RStudio, I think it would also make it easier for them to navigate. So it wasn't really documentation. Comments. Right, good job. I'm happy to see that. Also, you can see that there is a lot of comments on the functions. Now, it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure that you can do the same thing that you do in Python, where you do the documentation, like the comments for a function, as part of the function. So when you call the function, right, you can get the information about it that's been handwritten by the programmer. I think I should have done that, but I didn't. So I don't even have the right words to say this right now. Oh, right before stream, I was like, I should get another coffee. And I was like, no, I don't need another coffee. And right now I am regretting it. I could absolutely have used one more coffee. All right. Oh. Let's dig around in the oatmeal. What are those called? I'm gonna search another tab. I know they have a specific name, and it's just like, is it doc strings? I think it's doc strings. Okay, there is a docstring package on R. So I'm just looking at I guess I can pop it over here. I'm just looking at a Stack Overflow answer on docstrings in R. Go away. Dismiss. Attributes. Yes, I think this is what I wanted. Okay. Could move comments about functions into attributes. Describe. All right, there we go. So that's definitely an area for improvement, because if I wanted to find out what these functions did, our engines are going slowly this morning, mine are at least. So I wanted to find out what this function did. Right now, if I said describe, or if I tried to get a docstring or something about the function, it just wouldn't tell me anything, right? I'd have to rely on the name of the function, which I think duration of interval is a pretty good name of a function. Have I used camel case throughout? Sure have. That's good, right? Consistent casing, we love that. Is it camel casing or is it snake casing if the first letter is lowercase? I think it's snake casing, so I've used snake casing throughout. But if I use like describe, or I wanted to get like help about it, because this isn't a package, right? There isn't full documentation, but if I put that help as an attribute of the function, I could get it a little bit easier in line. So I think that's something that I would want to do if I rewrote this. And then let's look at the different functions that we have. Okay, so we have this number of intervals, takes a list of text grids and a tier numbers and returns a vector of the number of intervals, and each requires that you are in the same working directory as your files. Yeah, so I probably, if I rewrote this, I would have put I would have given an option for an argument for the directory to point to, rather than getting the working directory for the current directory that you're in. But I think it worked. There is a spacing error there. Okay, so it takes all the text grids, file names, okay. Create some variables we'll use later in the loop. Yep, we're starting to run into the areas where there are some issues. Also inconsistent variable assignment here, so that should definitely be a arrow. Oh, I guess from your point of view, yeah, like that. So just from a style perspective, it looks like I'm using inconsistent style guides, right? So here I have the arrow assignment, here I have equal assignment, arrow assignment, equal assignment. So should definitely go through and fix that. Should fix my spacing issues. Actually, I'm just gonna say use a linter. Use a linter, inconsistent style. Also, spacing errors. And these are very, very minor things, like the code ran. I'm not going to say it runs now because this was 8 years ago, and I imagine there are some dependency issues, but it definitely ran when I ran it. Also, another thing that it should have is a requirements document. Because I'm pretty sure there are some requirements. So if I pop over into the actual script where we're running the code, did I have some imports? I bet that I did, sure did. So bless you, sweetheart. I hard-coded the file paths. Oh, this is like looking at your own baby photos, right? You're like, I was so small and squishy. I didn't even know how to, I was gonna say throw a baseball. I still don't know that I could really throw a baseball very good. Not really a throwing type of person. Yeah, so requirements would have been great. Something to improve. So yes, some pretty big file issues. There should be a space here, inconsistent spacing, etc. Also, just really getting in there and rummaging around in the current working directory in a way that I think is not super extensible. All right, and this assumes that all of the files in the directory are text grids, right? Because it's just getting all of the file names. This gets the file names function. Okay, so what does this do? Gives you a list of text grid files and gives you the complete file path so you're in the same directory. Get the working directory. Paste. Okay, yes. Where am I getting these file names from is my question. Because it takes file name as an argument. Where is that coming from? Okay. I said this works. I don't know that this actually does work. Also, I'm removing the last 4 characters. Oh, honey, you can just split on character. You don't have to count them. What if you have a file extension that is more than 4 characters or 3 characters in a period? It's not gonna work. Oh, baby doll. All right. Broken. Yes. Okay. Well, noted. So I don't know what this does. Also, I should probably pop out this function outside of this function. It probably shouldn't be in here. We probably want to keep that separated a little bit. And files is from, I guess you give it the current working directory. And then, okay, so what this is doing is this is it's creating an object that is then being converted to text, that is then being passed to prot scripting language, and then prot scripting language is running it. And what I'm doing here is I am doing this in a loop of variable length, and then I'm returning the number of intervals. So a couple issues here with this function. So number one, this, no idea what this is. It looks like it is, okay, here it is. Okay, yes, I am using it in fact. So I'm using it with the name of the files that I'm getting from list of text grids. Okay, so I'm passing in a list. I think this would work if I don't think it has to be a list. I think it can be any iterable object. So any R object, all objects in R are iterable. Wow, okay. And then the big issue here is this. So loops in R are uniquely bad. I've just mentioned that everything in R is iterable. So this is language specific, right? And just a little background about me at the point when I was writing this. I'd been working with R for a little bit, but most of my like computer science and coding training had been, I'd had a little bit in Visual Basic.net in high school that didn't, it was a bad experience. And then in college, I'd taken sort of the intro computer science curriculum, and that was in Java. And I think in Java, a loop like this is not necessarily going to be a bad thing to do, right? And I'm overwriting this object, right? So the memory requirement shouldn't be awful, except the issue with loops and R, and this one is not particularly bad, is that they are worse than they are in other programming languages, because in R, everything is iterable, right? When you create an object, every item in that object is indexed, which means that for any object in R, you can do object square brackets, 1. It indexes from 1 and get the first item. So like a character vector of length 1, right? If I just say, numInt equals null, this is iterable. I can do numInt 1 and get something back, right? So the issue there is that whenever you create a new object, it gets indexed every single time. And when it is indexed, it is assigned new memory. So in this case, I think it may actually have been creating a bunch of like ghosts of this J object, basically, and assigning memory to them. I don't necessarily know that it would have been overwrit. There it is. If you are really into R, I would recommend Advanced R by Hadley Wickham. It's been a while, again, since I've worked intensively in R. I've been working more in Python recently. But the point there is you really want to avoid loops in R if at all possible. Everything is already iterated, right? Everything already has an index, which means that you can apply vectorized functions to everything. And that's how it's designed, right? It is a language. So R is based on S for statistics, and it is designed for statistical computing, and it is designed for vectorized operations everywhere, all the time, always. So you can almost always just not use loops in R and instead do it as a vectorized operation. And I think that would be pretty simple here. Yeah, how would I do this differently? I would not only use the current working directory. I'd have people put in a file. I think also I would just interact with the file system to get the names of the text grids. I would also make sure that I was only getting the text grids, right? So I'd, look in the file system, look in the directory I'd been pointed to, be like, okay, what are all the file names? What are the file names that end in text grid? Great, give me those. And then I would just have vectorized that is what I would have done. and yeah, because I need that list of objects to interact with. So that faces me thinking about whether or not I actually would have done this in Bash, right? I would have done this with a shell script. And I think it still makes sense to do this because I'm then running this prot command through R, which again, space issue, also indent issues. So could use some zhuzhing, could use a linter for sure. And then, yes, so I would do it all in R because I also need to store out those objects because you can see it returns this number of int. Also, this one's the kicker. Inside this loop, I am recreating this object and adding things to the end. Every time I do that, it creates a new object, right? It doesn't append in memory. It has to recreate it and reindex it. So never ever add to data in a loop in R. This is canonical what not to do. Spoiler alert, there's going to be a whole lot more of that in this file. But again, I think it's always important to think about technological artifacts like code in the context that they were created in. And for me at the time, this saved me a lot of time. Is it good code? No. Would I say you should use it? Absolutely not. But it saved my butt, right? It saved me literal weeks of work that I could use on other stuff, right? Like reading. I don't know that I'm a super slow reader, but I definitely find it very draining. So on a day when I was doing a lot of academic reading, I didn't have a lot of brain for other things, and this saved the brain. So it worked for what it worked for. All right. Also, chat is very quiet today. Feel free to jump in. I know most of you are more Python people than R people, but the worst code I ever wrote was in R. Well, that I wrote and then shared. There's been a lot of stinkers that never saw the light of day. All right, so same thing, appending in a loop, shouldn't be doing that. Also super, super inconsistent white space, like pick something, darling. Sorry, I'm being a little bit condescending to my younger self. Although I will say, at least there is consistent assignment through here, which tells me I was probably copying and pasting and then editing some of this code, but I didn't edit it all the way, you know what I mean? Yes, so this takes the labels of the intervals. All right, it takes the number of intervals that we have a function to generate. So we're gonna have to do both of these. And then for 1 through the number of intervals, again, there's a loop. We know the number of intervals. We were passed in this object. It should be vectorized. So yeah, that's how I would have rewritten that. And then the duration of the interval. So this uses stringer, which is great. Good package, really enjoy it. Oh, that's sweet, right? If you haven't used stringer, if you haven't installed it, uncomment the next line and run that. That's kind of nice. Assuming that you are running this as a script, I guess, that you're opening it and interacting with it directly. Usually a package of functions or a file of functions like this, I just run the whole thing to load them into memory. So, yeah, and you may notice that, again, especially if you're coming from Python land, like, oh wait, there's no like methods or objects. R tends to be pretty functional. So I would say that in terms of like keeping with the ethos of the language community, I'd say this is fine. I would not redo this as an object-oriented program because it's... Now that I'm thinking about that, sorry. Would I do this as an object-oriented program? I think no, because I was working with a library that already had done everything that it would make sense to assign to objects or create as objects to handle, right? So all of these commands that say prot, right, where they have like command arguments input, these are all based on I'm assuming, I haven't actually looked super deep in the code for the prot library itself, but I would assume that that was all they were building like an object for handling that. At least that's probably how I do it now if I were writing it myself. So I don't think it would make sense to create a separate, slightly different one for my own stuff that I would then be pushing onto another again, slightly different object that would then be pushed to a third programming language, or not programming language, a third thing. So yeah, I think a more functional approach here makes sense, and I'm not mad at it. And then convert to floats. Interesting. Okay, so I think what's been passed back here is a character vector, and I want it to be numeric so that it is a number. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I'm converting it to milliseconds. So I would probably rename this to something like duration milliseconds. And of course, the assignment variable is wrong, or the assignment operator is wrong. So yeah. Although definitely not as bad as these ones that are using, that are appending data in loops. Don't do that in R. Do not do that in R. It's a bad time. And then, so we are getting a bunch of information on these intervals. We're getting the number, we're getting the labels, we're getting the duration. So you can now sort of imagine, well, I can sort of imagine how these all would go in a spreadsheet that we would then, share with co-authors and use to do other things. And that's the sort of format that I wanted it in for my statistical analysis. And I think I mainly use this for my own work, my own individual research. But I think I also used it for a couple of projects where I had co-authors as well. So yes, there was an expected file format, and this is basically just munging stuff and avoiding having to work too much with prot scripting language directly. All right, and this is the time points. Okay, so what I'm noticing here is that there is a lot of repeated code here. So maybe I would actually create something like a time object and then interact with it in different ways. Although there's only 2 functions that use that, so that might ended up have been a more time-intensive thing. Robbie says, can you see the YouTube chat? I don't think so. I have it open, but I haven't seen anyone say anything. One sec, let me double check that I have the chat for the right video. People are saying things. Okay, very weird. Why isn't it showing up in the pop-out? Hi, sorry, I am not ignoring you. Thank you, Robbie. I just didn't see it. Wow, lots of people saying stuff. Yeah. Let's take a break and go back and look at things. I was feeling very lonely. Hello, Mental Solutions. Good to see you. Doing good, Yashavi. Hey, Ravi. I like visualization on R, but do I still recommend people getting into R only for visualization stuff? If the only thing you're doing is visualization, probably not, particularly if you're already familiar with like Matplotlib or Altair or Vega or whatever. But if you're doing a lot of statistical analysis, the statistical packages in Python are just not there, right? Like all the causal modeling people use R, and that's what they're writing code for. So I would recommend, if you're doing statistics, use R. If you are not, I find it very delightful to use, but like Altair is I wouldn't say a port, but like a parallel, a parallel to ggplot, which is my favorite plotting library. And then like pandas is basically recreating the functionality of R in terms of data frames. Data frames is an R concept. So yeah. If you were doing lots of stuff, I don't necessarily recommend just R. Yeah. Hi, Arvind. Robbie says the inner for loop you wrote in R during my PhD, which took a week to run. Yep, we haven't got there yet, but believe me, there are many layers of loops to come. MB Timothy says, where are you normally getting your data sets? So this was run on a data set that I had also done the recording for. So it was a very long process, and of course it was phonetic analysis, so I needed very high quality acoustic recordings. So I got people to come in, sit in the sound booth, do a bunch of tasks, etc. Yeah. Alexi says, adding a README as a feature makes me excited for the stream. Yeah. Pass by value language, doc strings, thank you. Why is the chat only showing up in this window and not that window? Yes, doc strings is what I was looking for. Camel casing, snake case for functions, camel for classes. I don't know why though. Your guess is as good as mine. Seems like a historical precedent. Yeah. You can do exception handling. It's still slow. Hi, Jorge. Advanced R. Yes. Whew. By Hadley Wickham. A paragon of the R community, and also just a cool guy, even if he does say GIF wrong. Thanks, Robbie, for hopping in the Twitch chat. I don't know why it didn't show up, and I feel bad for ignoring you. It was not my intention. I just did not see it. All right. It feels much less lonely in here now. I was trucking on, but I was like, where is everybody? All right. Yes. So one thing I could have done is, you know, created a time object and not run all of this multiple times. But yeah, I think that's a minor sin considering all the things that I did in here. Oh, interesting. Okay, so I did create an object and save it to the working directory. Okay, so I did a little bit of that, but I didn't do it with time points. Because, okay, it's all coming back to me now. So the interval stuff directly integrated with the text grid file. Text grid is a prot-specific file format. Let me show you what it looks like. I probably have some somewhere. Oh. Fascinating. There's a company that calls itself a alternative to Twilio that's called TextGrid. That is not what I'm looking for, though. Oh, there's a Python module for interacting with TextGrids. That's fun. I'm sorry, raw text grid, but basically, so I mentioned that it is for doing acoustic analysis, and you have your wave file, right, that has the sounds, and then a text grid is an annotation tile for that. So here we go. And their security certificate is also expired, so let's see if I can get there. There we go. So this is the prot documentation, as you can see, extremely academic website, and a text grid object allows you to do annotation, and it allows you to do multiple annotations per text file with time boundaries. Is there an example here? This is what they look like in prot. Do you have pictures? You sure don't. Anyway, it's a file format that has text images, text information, and time stamps. And what I'm doing with these first couple ones is just interacting with that text file and getting out the stamps. For this, I need to actually create a new object, although it's not really an object, it's really just creating a new file. So I don't know that I would have written an object here if I were doing it this way, and save it to the working directory. All right. So I also like that I included some reasonable defaults here, but I could change this. So this minimum pitch of 100 hertz, time step 0 seconds. I'm assuming that's what that means. Or probably 0 milliseconds, because you don't do much with just seconds in speech analysis. And then here is, bless me, here I am removing the .txt and adding dot intensity. And then, yes, or actually probably it's .wav. If this is taking the file, it's taking, it's taking a wave file. And again, I would probably in the future, or I guess in the now, I would not have done this by index, but you know. Alexi says, adding extremely academic website to my vocabulary. You know them when you see them. And then we get the intensity maximum. And a lot of this is just wrapping this, prot command from the prot R project, which is also now, I think, probably pretty defunct, it looks like, in slightly more usable syntax so that I can interact with files. And then, yeah, so here I'm taking in the file. Also, I probably wouldn't have named all of these things file. I probably would have named them something like wave file or intensity grid file, right? Because even though these both have file as the argument, they need different types of file. And I would probably also have added a test to see if I had been passed the correct type of file. Because right now it's just going to do this to whatever it gets, and will probably throw errors, particularly if you're going through a directory and doing this to everything in the directory. So, yep, intensity maximum. Intensityness is like loudness. Loudness is the percept. Intensity is the acoustic characteristic. Basically, loudness is your perception of how loud something is, and intensity is an absolute measure of how loud it is. And then the time of the maximum intensity, and then creating pitch objects. And again, I just stuck them in the file folder, which is fine. Yeah, because you do sometimes need to get, so especially for something like doing a figure, you need this pitch object and the wave file, and then you put them on top of each other to create the figure so that people can see what you're looking at. And also for purposes of double checking your work, right? So the automatic pitch detection sometimes has like halving and doubling errors. So, right, if you get a pitch that's like 40,000 hertz from a human voice, probably it's not. Probably something has gone wrong there. Or like, it's 150 hertz from, let's say, somebody like me, an adult woman. Probably it's not. Probably that's a halving error. So being able to double check each of the pitches and each of the pitch measurements is something that you'd want to do, and that's discipline specific. I don't think you'd always want to do that. Yep, and then this is broken. This function is supposed to extract. It's good that I included that it was broken. I think I probably should have commented out so you didn't load a broken function into memory, but there you go. This function is supposed to extract pitch from a pitch object at a given time point. At the moment it appears to be broken, it returns undefined regardless of whether there is a pitch track present at the point where it is called or not. I've circumvented this by creating pitch tiers from the pitch objects and then using them, but it seems a little inefficient. Yeah, I think that probably relates to me not understanding something about the underlying code that the prot R library was using to interact with the prot object, or possibly the prot object itself. So I think the way that I would address this now is sort of rummage around in the prot R code and paste a bunch of things and see what the files look like and what's in there. Yeah, because this is get value at time is supposed to be a specific thing that you can do, and args pitch max. So maybe it's something about the args pitch max. Maybe it's something about the args pitch max that's going on there that's an issue. All right, and then here we have this to pitch tier object. Okay, except I am creating a file. Okay, so I think what the prot commands are doing is just creating new files as sort of like their default working structure, I guess, as opposed to creating R objects and manipulating them in R, which makes sense because prot works with files and objects, prot objects. So I think it's creating files to pass it back and forth between prot and R a little bit more easily. Get the pitch from pitch tier. Yeah, I think most of these look okay. I'm not seeing a bunch of obvious issues. I feel like there may be something a little bit more There may be something a little bit more elegant than using regular expressions to get out the numbers, but yeah, I think that's something I might have done differently, because I had these objects that I was returning from pitch and I was just interacting with them as if they were strings when clearly they had some sort of internal structure. So that might be something that I did a little bit differently in the future. Formants. So formants are, I mentioned, let me just grab an example spectrogram just so you can see. Just so you can see a little bit what we're talking about, because I've just sort of said a bunch of things and expected you to be able to visualize this. Get bigger. Okay, so this is a spectrogram. We have the time along the bottom, we have frequency along the sides. So higher up is higher frequency. High-pitched sounds, I guess you would call that. And then the color coding in this case, so apologies if you're red-green colorblind, you may not be able to see this very well. The darker the red, the higher intensity at that particular time point in that particular frequency range. So you can see, if you sort of like look at this, that there are these bands of intensity, right? Because you think about, you know, harmonics and octaves, noise tends to create points in the frequency spectrum that then are repeated. It's harmonics. I don't want to get too deep into the acoustics. It's not, I mean, it's relevant, but it's not super duper relevant. And sort of like where those bands are is the pitch in the up and down. So we were talking about that. And then in vowels in particular, so you can see that some of the places, like this bit here, there's like right in the 0, 0, there's like a two couple bands, and then there's like those bands disappear and you get probably an S, or yeah, probably an S with that frequency. Sorry, with that intensity that high. So it's probably like, I don't know, and then it stops here, so that's a stop. And then we have some sort of diphthong or liquid or glide, or I don't know what this is supposed to say. Yeah, it's not annotated. Yeah, anyway, so in vowels, you get bands of higher frequency energy. So you can see there, I don't know how well you can see my mouse, but they're sort of like on this 0.2 marker, there's like the fundamental frequency down at the bottom. And then if you go up, you have this band here. And if you go up again, you have that band there. And if you sort of look across, you can see that in different little high intensity snippets, those bands are in different places. Those are formants. So they're like areas of high harmonic activity, and the location of the formants, the first and second formant, not the 0th formant, which is just based on the pitch of your voice overall, is acoustically a very important marker of difference between vowels, right? So ah versus e versus versus aw versus ooh, right? I'm trying not to do other distinctions as well, just moved around in the mouth. And that's how you measure them. Those are formants. That was a long description, but that's what I'm getting here, right? I'm getting this formant information. So this stuff you kind of have to tune a little bit based on the specific, you know, the specific file you have, perhaps the specific speaker you have. And what I'm trying to get is, where is the frequency of each of these formants, basically. So I can measure those so that I can make a vowel chart. Let me see if I can grab that real quick so you can see what I'm talking about here. There we go, that'll work. Get big. There we go. So here we have, you know, the first formant and the second formant. The reason that they are flipped and inverted like this is because this is more or less the way the mouth looks. So you have E is a high front vowel, so the tongue is very forward and very lifted. And that's up here. And then O is a very back low vowel. I don't know what this 6 is supposed to represent. Probably ow, based on those lexical items. So ow in here. And basically that's representing the mouth. If I was looking from your point of view this way. So upper front, upper back, lower front. And obviously it's not a square because your chin and tongue and hyoid and everything are in the way. Anyway, so if I want to make this chart, I need the values of those formants. How do I get those formants automatically, particularly if I'm talking about like thousands and thousands of tokens? Well, I can measure them by hand by clicking and looking with my eyeballs, or I can do it automatically, which is what this code is for. So here I'm getting the formant measures for the text, for the wave files that I was putting in, blah, 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 blah. That's what's going on here. I know that was a lot of linguistics and acoustics, but like it takes a long time to do it by hand, right? Basically, you would look at something like this. You would like listen carefully and be like, okay, this is this lexical item. Here's a format, record those values. Or if you're looking at like dynamics or diphthongs or something, you'd have to record, if I look over time point 1, here's the format, time point 2, there's the format. I've done this by hand a lot for really close to phonetic analysis. That is still sort of the standard, but if you're trying to like scale up, it makes sense to use computers. So that's what I was doing. And these actually don't look that bad. Yeah, I think one thing that I'm seeing a lot is this sort of interacting with these objects as if they were strings using, string manipulation, which it worked. And definitely better than trying to loop over something. But maybe a thing that I could have done is interacting more with these prop objects directly, because I'm assuming that there is some ability to do that within this prod.r library that I just wasn't doing. Or maybe there wasn't. Maybe it just writes them directly to file, and that is the whole thing that it does. So although I'm seeing here just the input. Yeah, and so here you can see, please make note that there may be pretty severe pitch tracking errors. Make sure you check your measurements. So like I was saying, it makes sense that you want to save the files so that if something is wrong, you can look at it with your eyeballs and see where it's wrong and record the correct values. So overall, I appreciate that there's a lot of comments, right? I appreciate that there are functions, right? This isn't all just a single long script. There are some like places where I'm going to introduce pretty big performance issues, and it is particularly these for loops, and especially these for loops where I am appending. Should not have done that. It worked, but it is both very slow because of the indexing, and is also very memory intensive because every time we attend, we assign new memory. I didn't know that. I'd maybe heard the word vectorized a couple times and I did not know what it meant. So I was doing my best. All right. Morning, Chrono Zero. Good to see you. So, just to review so far, looks good. It has a README, which is great. It's got lots of comments, which I appreciate. And if I have not been seeing the chat, then I think also probably y'all haven't been seeing the things that I've been pasting in the chat. So I'll paste a link to the repository if you want to check it out. Do not use this code. Please do not. You will be sad. Yeah, so that's good. I like that. It was modular, so well done. I think it could have been even more modular, that don't repeat yourself, drive programming principles, but I was doing at least some, which is really good to see. I like that I included links to documentation for the dependencies. It was really easy to go through, right? Like I haven't looked at this in 8 years, but I still what do each of these functions do? It's very clear. I described it. I described it basically is how I did it. I think the naming of the functions was pretty good. I think the naming of the arguments of the functions was not. I think that could have been a little bit clearer because some of these take in text grid files. Some of these take in, let's find an example. Some of these take in wave files. Some of these take in pitch objects, and I called those all files. So I should probably, if I were going to do this again, I'd go back and make those names a little bit clearer. But I do think the, you know, naming is pretty good. Yeah. Alexi says, I expected more. Oh, there is more. This is just the functions. And then we're going to get to the script. Robbie says, you could replace the loops with pers f of x. Yes, absolutely. I think that would have been a great thing to do instead, but I didn't. Yeah. I also like the, you know, being able to call out common errors. I think this could probably have gone in the README instead of in the functions, because I was clearly expecting someone to copy and paste this, right? Or open this and like look at it all with their eyeballs. I also could have done these into doc strings or attributes in R, or there are libraries that you can do doc strings in, but just something. So if I was, you know, like using describe or something, I'd have a clear idea of what the function did. Yeah. But overall, could have been worse. Could absolutely have been worse. Now let's look at the worst. All right, so those were all of the different functions to do different things. We were basically getting a bunch of acoustic measures, and then what did we do to it? Well, let me tell you. So, bless. I mean, yes, you should use. You could have written a test for that, babe. You could have written a test. It would have been very simple. Yeah, I think that's a big to improve. 0 tests. Also, add ability to catch common issues. Wrong file type. File name with space, etc. Yes, ABILI. There we go. Yes. Alexi says, I will take the code written 8 years ago to my grave. Yeah, but then only you learned from it, right? We can all learn from each other's mistakes. Right, and I had my contact information. I don't think that email still works. And also, you know, that my work was supported by the NSF GRFP. So good to disclose your funding. Big, long discussion of what I was doing. Basic analysis of vowels, so not all speech sounds, just vowels. Takes time-aligned text grid files that contain only vowels and .wave sound files and returns your choice of duration, intensity, pitch, F1 and F2. So here's something I did, bless me, I did go through and mark the vowels by hand. So if we're looking at the spectrogram, right, I did mark, this one is not annotated, but I did mark the boundaries between each of the speech sounds by hand. And I think what I did was I had a, I'm going back now. I'm pretty sure that I was working from elicitation texts. So I had the texts that the users had spoken, but I didn't have information. Thank you, Benson. I don't know if you can hear him. Okay, he's done. But I didn't have information on like speech errors or stuff. So if someone said bat, cat, oh yeah, that's rat, or whatever while they were reading, I'd have to like go through and fix that. And then I did forced alignment, and then I went through and I corrected the forced alignment by hand. So forced alignment is if you have the spectrogram and you have your, if you have a wave file, actually you don't need a spectrogram. So if you have a sound file and you have, you know, the text of what was said in that sound file, you can do the best guess to align those two things to each other temporally. So you have timestamps, and I went through and corrected it by hand. It took a long time. It is a lot of work to do acoustic analysis. I don't know if y'all knew that, but that's why I was trying to script some of it. So good job, past Rachel, for, you know, trying to automate stuff. All right, information on where the pitch F1 and F2 are taken, so first and second formant, from the point of greatest intensity within that delineated vowel, which I did by hand. I will also create associated, I don't know that that is spelled correctly. Prot objects for each measurement you choose to include. So if you do this 1,000 times, you're going to get a lot of files. I think I don't think I understood at that point the difference between an object and a file. I think I thought that all objects were files, possibly. Like I'd had a little bit of object-oriented programming in undergrad, which at that point would have been, what was this, 2014, which would have been like 3 years ago at that point. So I knew a little bit about object-oriented programming, but I think that I had some misapprehensions about what it was. Yeah, created a lot of files, but again, I think that made sense, especially given the fact that you would need to go back and hand check and hand correct things, especially if you got pitch doubling or having errors. Oh dear. So I think the big red flag in this README Plus is note that some of these processes are really resource intensive. They didn't need to be, hun. It could have been so much more efficient. And depending on the number of files you have to analyze and how fast your computer is, may take several hours or even days for very large data sets. So I did take up the phonetics lab computers for I want to say about a week running these scripts, but again, it saved me several weeks of work by hand, but they were running 24/7. Yeah, thankfully I don't think anyone else was working on stuff at that time and needed those computers, because anyway. Requires that you have already loaded useful prot function star, so loading all the memories, all the functions to memory. I think in these times, I probably would have just done this as a package. But at that time, I was super intimidated about making packages. This was before I went to the R Unconference and got my first code review, actually. It was the first time I had a code review done. Learned a lot. Stopped using nested for loops. Yeah, but I think that's what I do here. And then I've got instructions on how to use it. That's great. I was building this for myself, but also of the people in my lab. Dan McCloy was a very accomplished programmer. He'd worked in tech before he did his PhD. But after him, I was probably the person who'd done the most programming, which is not saying a lot. So I was also trying to provide a lot of information so that folks could find this. Robbie says, images are stored in an array. Is a WAV file also an array? What data structure is used to store sound data? Yeah, so WAV file is a file format, and I believe it is stored as a digitized waveform. So for each time point, you have the information about the frequency. And then how many time points there are is determined by the sampling rate. So, if you have a high sampling rate, you get a lot of time points, and each time point is just a value. And then if you combine them, it sounds like noise. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And then like compression, reduces the amount of information in the file. I don't know if that's helpful. I should absolutely have had another coffee, but yeah, so I think like lots of information on how to use it, and like you can tell that this happened to me, and so I told you all about it, which I appreciate. Yeah, and then again, section headers. So I would say, first of all, really well commented. You know what's going on here. And at that point, and even honestly still to this day, when I'm scripting something, I'll write down everything that needs to happen, and then I will use those comments to write out the code. I wonder why. I wonder why it took a really long time. Oh, bless. Yeah, so first of all, it is pretty resource intensive to go from formants to waves. To go from just a wave file to a formant, because you need to do, right? So to get this decomposition across frequencies, you need to do a Fourier analysis to pull it apart in that direction. And then, of course, you need to do the signal processing to do the pitch detection to find the formants. And then that's done at each time point. So especially if you have a very high sampling rate, it takes a while, right? Just it's a time intensive process. Lots of flops and operations would need to be done. That wasn't redundant. But also it should not have been in a list. I probably would have just created a vector of places where that was true. Yes. So let's step through here and see what it does. So first of all, again, really well commented. Even again, 8 years later, I know what's going on in here. And you can definitely see that I'd had like this much Java, because look at me defining all my variables at the top. Not usually an R thing. And also my assignment operators are inconsistent. Yep. So you can see here, I've got some of these have the equal assignment operators, some of these have the arrow assignment operators. Since then, I've really moved to, when I'm writing R, I use the tidyverse style guide, so it should always be the arrow assignment operator, except for assigning arguments to functions. So this should be an equal sign, this should be an arrow. Fun fact about this, the arrows can also go the other direction if you want to be really chaotic. Don't do it. All right, and then, okay, so this is good. I don't even remember doing this. That's nice. So if you have a CSV file of just the labels you're interested in, right? Let's say you just want to do the vowels. You can put that in there and be like, hey, only give me So that's good. And I believe, I'm trying to remember what the format of the things I was working with is, because I used the script a couple times, right? I was doing a lot of acoustic analysis. I used the script a couple times. I want to say that I was using Alphabet. Which I talked about a little bit. I was using ARPABET, so it was phonetically transcribed, right? So instead of using the International Phonetic Alphabet for I was writing AE, AH, AO. Nobody in my test data had AO because I was working with Pacific Northwest speakers. And in the Pacific Northwest, and are merged. Not for me though, they're different for me. Okay, so yes, this was what was in the information. So if I was like, I only want to see information on like A and E, you could include a file with those little ARPABET vowels, if that was what was in your text grids. Yeah. Lexi says, it makes me remember when my friend was using some ancient code in his neuroscience lab. It required human intervention. It was super slow. Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely... But if it works, right, and it would, particularly if it's super specialized and there's like 14 people in the world that need to do it, it saves you time, right? And like I said, I like to think about technological artifacts in their context, and in the context where the other option is only working by hand, that is a big improvement. Yeah, I think my similar experience was I took some courses in a speech lab that was working on motor theory, and their their MATLAB code was yeah, that was the summer I learned MATLAB. Not my favorite programming language, and yeah, they had a lot of code in the lab that had been written by like a while ago, and it worked, but wow, it was convoluted. And I will say, again, something I really like about this, you know what's going on. It's well commented, so good job, Pass Rachel. Alexi says equals and the arrows for assignment are both the same. I mean, yeah, you can use the equals if you want. You should probably do it consistently, which I was not doing here. I feel like the data table folks tend to use equals more than the arrows. I don't remember exactly, but we wrote new code and made something like a 1 year progress in a matter of weeks. His boss was very impressed. Yeah, I think if you know how to program, particularly if you know how to like use a scripting language, it can be easy to forget how many people don't, right? It's a specialized skill you had to learn, and also don't understand how much time it could save them, right? Like another thing that I did a lot by hand as an undergrad was renaming files. I would not do that by hand now, right? I would script it and I would save myself, hundreds of thousands of hours in retrospect. But at the time, I just didn't know. And I'd had kind of a, particularly before I took the computer science courses, I'd had, a really, really disempowering, I would say, experience trying to learn how to code. Because I went to like a, not that small, but a pretty small rural high school. And I was part of the virtual governor's school, which meant that we had a programming class, but it was like a bunch of people who didn't know how to program, sitting in a computer lab doing distance learning together, but nobody knew what they were doing, and we didn't really have access to instructors. And it was, it made me feel dumb and small. And if that's been your experience with trying to learn how to program, then just doing things by hand, even if it takes a really long time, if that doesn't make you feel dumb and small, can really feel like the better option. So yeah, which is why we are using, that was why I'm talking about this today, right? Like, we've all made mistakes, and these are some of the mistakes that I've made. Anyway, I got a lot of compassion in my heart for people who are doing janky things very slowly, because then later you can do less janky things faster, right? Alexi says, the old code was in MATLAB. What a coincidence. Yep. MATLAB. Like I said, not my favorite. Yeah. Okay, and I also like this, talking about why did you do this way, dear? What? So what I did was I read in a CSV, and then I got the first item in that CSV, which is, so there's first vector in this CSV. I could have just asked for them to give me the information about what the column with the relevant information in it was stored in. Yeah, so something that, like, an idiosyncrasy, something that I did that I don't know if a lot of people do, is that, like, I'd done a lot of, at this point, mostly string manipulation work, right? So I spent a lot of time working with regexes. I spent a lot of time, trying to learn Perl and failing. Like, I know exactly enough Perl to know that I don't really want to learn any more Perl, I'd say, is where I am. And so a lot of times, if something was an object and I could have interacted with it using a method, instead I treated it like a flat text file and interacted with it that way. And that's not quite what's going on here, but it's something that you'll see a lot in my old code. If you're looking at my old code, I don't know why you would. Yeah, like I treated objects and files like unstructured data, like raw text data, because that's what I was used to working with. So it's just like, it came through in my code. I'd call it a code smell. All right, information on where to get ProdR, because it wasn't on CRAN. I don't know if it still is. Still is not on CRAN, if that makes sense. And then I hand set the working directories for the lab computer. Oh, bless. Yeah, this is lab user, and each of the lab users had their own file. I probably in the future would just have given you the option to add your files there. Yep. Yeah, and this was, oh yeah. So this was for the work I was doing on, this was a continuation of my undergrad work where I was looking at task-specific effects and quantifying them, basically. So if I ask you to read a word list, or I ask you to have a conversation, or I ask you to read a passage, the speech that you produce is going to be different. And this is work that I was doing that was basically showing how, at an acoustic level, to help people who are doing laboratory work design tasks that would be more useful for their work. So that's basically what I was doing here. All right. Andre says clean code. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. I mean, there's a lot of style issues, weird spacing issues, but yeah, also you can definitely see, like, I feel like this one was probably copied and pasted, and I just sort of like worked around a little bit. Because if you look at my functions for my function file, I was using the style where you had your closed curly brackets on a new line, which I do still prefer. For me, the more white space in code, the better, because I've mentioned a couple times I'm dyslexic, and a lot of white space helps me parse things as a person. Rachel, why did you try to learn Perl? Listen, someone had told me that was the language you needed to know to learn NLP. Speaking of things that made me feel dumb and small. I wouldn't recommend learning Perl to do NLP if that's not clear. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here I actually am searching using regexes again for a specific file ending. So that's great. And I did it with the text grids as well. Fabulous. So I think, yeah, good to have that. I definitely should have put some like tests inside the functions that are going to use these outputs though. Yeah. Alexi says, I don't remember very well, but I mentioned that I have some sort of dyslexia. I do, yes. Do you experience it differently for natural language and computer code? That is a great question. In generally, code is a little bit easier for me to read for a couple reasons. One is syntax highlighting, right? Like having, colors, different colors is particularly helpful. Monospace fonts also tend to be a little bit better for dyslexia, so that helps as well. So I think I mentioned Comic Sans was developed as a dyslexia-friendly font. Also, there's lots of white space. Also, there's lots of things that I don't interpret as language characters, right? Like I look at this, that's not a word, right? But like that counts as a word and that counts as a word, but they're separated. And also, there's, I don't know, there's sort of less background, if that makes sense. So if I'm looking at just like a page of text, right? Let me just pull up a page of text from somewhere. If I'm just looking at a page of text, it's sort of squishy, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to describe this percept. It's almost like taffy, right? Like if like it's a candy that you pull like that. It's almost like taffy that's being pulled, right? So things are pretty connected. I'm really paying attention to the envelopes of words, sort of the outside. And it can get sort of like a bit like sticky and compacted and hard to pull apart. And also like things sort of, you know, that thing where like, oh, letters move around. I don't have that. And I don't really know how helpful that is as a way to describe it. But things are a lot more sort of like mushy. And in code, it's a lot more chunked, right? It's more like taffy that's been like cut up. And because code is designed to be unambiguous, it can sometimes be a little bit easier. At least just to like look at it and correctly read what the words are. So the main thing that I tend to do is I tend to just misread the word, or especially when I'm typing, I tend to just use the wrong letter. So yeah. But of course, like I'm reading in my head. When I'm reading out loud, because I'm reading slower than I am when I'm reading in my head, I generally make fewer mistakes, but not always. Yeah. I don't know. Hopefully that was helpful and or interesting. Perl is hell. Trying to read Perl continues to be hell. But yeah. Robbie says, people generally read the README in GitHub. Yes. So again, this is the fact that all this information is in the script itself is really indicative of the way I was expecting it to be used. Somebody to just like open it in RStudio and step through line by line. Basically, I don't know that this would run just all the way through unless you are on the UW Phonetics lab computers and had access to my lab user files. Yeah. What do I think about the future of Perl 7? I don't know. I haven't really kept up with it. Alexi says, people generally read the README. Oh dear. I mean, I do, but I'm also the type of person who reads the documentation, and I know that not everyone is. So, Robbie says, Perl is dead. V is a wonderful language. It compiles in under 1 second. In my experience, programming languages don't really die. People just stop building new things in them. I think I mentioned last time that my mom, when she was in computers, was using, BASIC and Fortran and COBOL, she'll still, every so often, someone will call her and be like, can you come fix this thing? And her answer is no. But yeah, like the code she's written is still in production, right? And like, you know, airline databases and systems are mostly in Fortran and can only handle ASCII, and that's an issue. Or like a lot of government systems are, yeah. If a language was used at one time to produce a lot of technological artifacts, until the need for those technological artifacts go away, I think it's not dead, right? Like, people are still going to need to know it. So, yeah, you're very welcome, Alexi. I hope it was. Yeah. All right. And Alexi, Andre just saying like, hey, I think you will probably actually find that there's a lot of Perl in there. Yeah. All right. So going through here. Oh, is this a test? Kind of. It's not a test. Okay, so I think this is like a proto test. Definitely, good job. I think probably could have done that as like a try catch, but information about whether or not you have a text grid for every wave. So again, the text grid is the annotation file. The wave is the speech file or the sound file, making sure that those match. So that's good. Okay, a little kind of a test almost. Set up a data frame. All right, creating a data frame. Okay, and then are we going? Again, why? Okay, so this stylistically is a mess, right? So I have call classes, which is in snake case, which I had been using, and then call.name, so completely separate. I think this read.table, is that a data table thing? Okay, so this bit is very, very idiosyncratic, and it's very weird, right? It doesn't fit with the rest of the code. I think this might have been another thing where I was trying to like Google how to do stuff and copying and pasting from Stack Overflow questions. But yeah, I should definitely have tidied this up a bit. A linter here would just have like saved me a lot of I know, I'm not embarrassed. I have a lot of compassion for my past self, and I was learning, and I wasn't in a computer science department, I was in the linguistics department, and I was trying to learn to code and phonetics and NLP and ASR, and at this point I was also, working in signed languages, so I was also trying to learn like the fundamentals of sign language annotation. I was doing a lot, and teaching, right, and trying to have, a life and eat food, and 2014, and this would have been the year after I burned myself out really badly. So yeah, there was a lot going on, and I think like for someone who was like pretty much completely self-taught at this point, not too bad. I was trying my best, and you know what? I appreciate it. All right, and here's where we get to the issue. So here we have two nested loops. And in these nested loops, I'm using rbind, right? So I'm appending, and like I mentioned, loops in R are almost never the right thing to do. You should always vectorize. It's just faster. The language is designed with that usage in mind. So not only did I not vectorize, but I also, when you do rbind or cbind, again, you create a new object. So extremely memory intensive as well. This should just be reworked to be completely vectorized, and would probably have been, I'm trying to remember if this one had a loop in it as well. I think it did, so it probably would have been, I don't know, much faster. I was trying to do it in big N notation, and I don't have the brain for that right now. I should have had one more coffee. If anyone else wants to do it, right? There's a for loop with two loops nested inside of it, which are not nested inside of each other. And then saved out all the measurements. Yep. So the other thing is, if this crashed, right, if we got an out of memory error in here, because we didn't actually save the file until after we had gone through and done everything, we would have completely lost all our work and needed to start again. As I remember, that happened a couple times. Yeah. Andre says, new Fortran and NVIDIA Fortran are still alive. And Lexi says, every math problem is already solved in Fortran. Yeah. There's a difference between something not being popular right now and it not being useful, right? Like, I know we've talked about this before, but like, I think that like small boring language technologies are the most impactful and interesting ones, and also they're the ones that we all use every day. And the sort of like big flashy things, like how many of you have genuinely used a large language model for something today that helped you in your life? Probably not most of you. How many of you have used spell check? Certainly I have. So yeah. All right, and this is the exact same code. Oh, bless. Noted. So I think the if here is fine. Again, we've got multiple nested loops. Alexi says, if you're interested in vectorized one-letter named programming languages, try Q. I've not heard of Q. If I were going to learn another language right now, I mean, I dabbled around in JavaScript a while recently. A while ago on the channel, just because like it was helpful for me. And I've actually ended up using it a couple times, mostly just to, like, fix small stuff. I don't know, I've got a couple of friends that are like really into Julia, but also I feel like I kind of know languages that do the things that Julia does, so yeah, I don't know. I think right now with Python and R and, you know, Bash and SQL and the teeny bit of Perl is mostly what I use day to day. Although I'm not really doing a whole bunch right now in terms of just building software. But all right, and then more things. Yep. Okay, same thing, right? And this is, again, it's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of nested for loops. There we go. Oh, this one's going to take an extra long amount of time. Yep, because it's doing, it is calling these, what are these called? These functions, which, as I remember, also have nested for loops. So yeah, we're talking what, 1, 2, 3 layers, and then an additional, yeah, it's a mess. There's a lot of nested for loops in here, which even in a language where for loops aren't particularly bad would be, you know, bad big N, but in R it's extra bad, and it's also a memory error, also a memory hog. So yep. Andre says, use classical C language with libraries API for the simplest and fastest computations. Yeah, I guess I could learn C. I kind of don't want to, just like out of stubbornness at this point. And like, I don't know what I'd use it for. I know it's a foundational programming language. People really like it, blah, blah, blah. But not, I am very much, so in knitting, there's this distinction between a product knitter and a process knitter, right? And if you're a process knitter, you knit because you enjoy knitting and it's a fun activity and you like it. And if you're a product knitter, you knit because you want that exact sweater and you can't get it any other way. I am a product programmer. I am only going to learn the tools that are directly applicable to what I'm doing, and I'm only going to learn a new tool if it's going to save me a substantial amount of time. I don't like program for fun as an activity. I do it because I have aims and goals, and I want to do those aims and goals. And that's why I'm here, right? So I'm very like practical and end product focused. And like, I cannot think of a single thing that I could build in C and no other language that I actually want to build. You know what I mean? So that's, you know, that's my background. And like, I know that absolutely some people like computer languages for their own sake and programming for its own sake, but not me, especially. All right, and then finding the max pitch. Yeah, I think, like, I don't know how worth it is to review all of these things in depth, because the big issue is that there's just a bunch of nested for loops, and the time complexity and the memory intensity is very high, right? So like everywhere where I'm seeing C or R bind or C bind, I am taking up more and more memory every time I do the for loop. So, yep, same thing. Here we go. Every single time. Yep, there we go. Well, actually, to be fair, I think the nested for loop here is in the function and not actually in this code, but still you shouldn't be using for loops at all, right? Especially because I had a table that I had the dimensions of. I had the vector already. Like, I knew how long the vector needed to be. It would have been, I could have just used apply, right? Like from base R. I didn't even need to use per, but I didn't. Bless. So yeah. Anyway, that's the code, and yeah, don't do this. Never do this. Like, avoid doing it in most languages unless it's for something very, very small. And again, this wasn't small, right? I was doing this, you know, thousands of times, right? Because I had a bunch of data, I had word lists, I had reading passages, and then I had conversational data. So I'd had people had conversations that I had then, you know, transcribed by hand, and then I had force aligned, and then I corrected the force alignments, and then I had all the vowels in each of those conversations. And think about how many vowel sounds I've made in the last 3 seconds, and then imagine what 5 minutes of conversation with multiple pairs of partners, of conversational partners, was going to be in terms of number of measurements. It is a lot. It was so much data, and it took so much time to run, but I didn't have to do it by hand, right? I did a lot of stuff by hand in this project, but I didn't have to do that part by hand. So yeah. Corky says, if you're learning something low level, you might as well learn Rust. Yeah. And Lexi says, I tried a programming language called Brainfuck. I have not. No, it doesn't sound fun. I'm just gonna say that sounds like a programming language that's intentionally hard to work with, and that's not something I'm super interested in. So yeah, with that, I think we're pretty much done with the code review at this point. So do not use for loops if at all possible, especially nested ones. So that is, the nested for loops is far and away the biggest problem with this code, right? And I think, you know, if I'd had a little bit more computer science training, I probably would have known that, right? Because if we talked about big N notation, because I took basically like the first year of a computer science degree, if we talked about big N notation, I had forgotten it by this point. So I didn't think about it. And I also didn't know a lot of like R specific stuff. Because I'd also spent a little bit of time working on Python 2 as well. But I mean, if you've ever tried to do statistical analysis in Python, you know that it is awful. And why would you do that, right? That's why R exists, to do statistical analyses. So might as well use the specialized tool. So yeah, I knew a lot about for loops. I didn't know that much about vectorization, and it was a choice I made that I would not make again. So biggest one, don't do that. But it was very easy to follow. Like, even now, 8 years later, I can go back and can look at this code. I know what it does, and I know how to improve it. So overall, you know, could have been worse. I think someone said, yeah, it's pretty clean code, pretty readable. Some style problems. I didn't know what a linter was at that point. Like, I'd never heard of one. No one had ever told me about them. I was just sitting in my cubicle trying to like make things work with Stack Overflow and like my, you know, vague memory of a year of computer science education several years before, and like a little bit of Python and a little bit of Perl, and having absolutely failed to use R once before in undergrad. So I was doing my best, and gosh darn it, I made it work, and I made it readable. And yes, I think the biggest thing is yeah, the for loops. I just didn't know. And it's such a simple fix. So yeah. And if you are working with R, don't use for loops, vectorize it. And if you are using for loops, don't nest them, and don't nest them 3 deep. My God. It's surprising the lab computer didn't just like catch on fire. And there was like one little mini test. So I'm kind of proud of myself for that. It could have been like a proper test. I don't even know what the sort of like most popular right? Because like in Python, you use PyTest. I'm not entirely sure about R. I didn't do a lot of tests when I was doing R programming, but I could have done some like try catches for, particularly with the functions that were taking specific types of files for making sure they were getting the right types of file. I think that could have been super impactful, but not as impactful as not using the for loops. So if you want the code, maybe as a teaching tool, I'm perfectly happy if you're like, this is bad, don't do this. It is on GitHub. It's rctapman/prot_r_tools. Yeah. And also, I think the library that it relied on is also no longer being maintained. So if I were going to redo it, I'd probably actually do it in Python, given that there is a Python prot library. Let's see. Yeah, so I would probably use Parcelmouth, prot in Python, the Pythonic way, or something similar. All right, they've moved to Python 3, which is great. You'll love to see it. Currently in a premature state. Okay, I might find something maybe a little bit less premature, something mature, and in active development. Yeah. Let me see what their GitHub looks like. When was the last time this was updated? 2 days ago. All right, so yeah, this looks like it is actually in active development unlike the library that was last edited 6 years ago. So yeah, I probably would use Python if I were doing this now. The file manipulation and information I'd probably do as a bash script, just because it would be way faster. And yeah, I don't know. At this point, I think I'd also feel a little bit more confident using prot scripting language in a little bit more of a detailed, in-depth way, because I've learned a lot about scripting languages since then. So I might even do it just in prot. Who knows? Yeah, so that is the code review. Chrono0 says, I tried to convert intro to statistical learning from R into Python and it was painful. Yeah, like I said, I care about doing things efficiently, and if you're doing statistics, Python just is not built for it. Like, that's fine, right? Programming languages have different uses. I wouldn't build, I was gonna say I wouldn't build a website in R. I'd build a dashboard website in R, but I probably wouldn't, right? Like, it's no replacement for like Flask, right? So. Alexi says, now I know why my friend working in speech to text looks so tired when we meet. Yeah, I mean, speech is really cool and interesting and complex and fun if you like it. But yeah, it is difficult. It's complex, right? Yeah. Andre says the imperative programming on R seems not as elegant compared to the functional ones. Yeah, I think I mentioned the sort of the ethos of the community is very functional, which makes sense, right? Because if you're doing statistical analysis, you have data in, analysis out, and you don't need to create a bunch of things in the middle, usually. Okay, sorry, my screensaver turned on because I stopped moving my mouse around. I'm just gonna move it around really quick for a little bit. Yeah. Like I said, I enjoyed the stream. There should be more content like this. Thank you. I hope you found it helpful and interesting. If there's no Python library for something that doesn't exist, wrong. You gotta use a different tool, right? Right tool for the job. All right, so before we wrap up, I wanna say thank you to my coffee supporters for the month. Rex Arski, Matt Sullivan, Phil Colton, Jay Alamar, Ravinder Ram. Hi, Ravi. I saw you were in the chat earlier. Docking Guy and Luke Davis. I appreciate y'all. This is, data science, language technology education is currently my full-time job, and I'd like to keep it that way. So your support is really, really appreciated. Yeah, also, if you've signed up at the Chit Chat Club level on Coffee, which is $20 a month, I'm probably going to schedule the Chit Chat this month for probably the last week of the month. So keep an eye out for me contacting you about that, just those of you on that level. All right. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you found this helpful and informative and fun. And thank you, Ravi, for letting me know that I wasn't seeing the chat. Oh, hey, Docking Guy, thank you. I will talk to y'all on Thursday for our coffee chat. I, as always, have way more links than I thought I would at this point of the week. So it may be another quite long one. Thanks for joining. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you on Thursday. Bye.